Hello. Hello, my name is Elias Dottemar. I work politically in Berlin. I have a question for Mr. LaRouche. You said last year that the Greek crisis, so-called, is not a Greek crisis, but that Greece is a test case. I don't know if you can explain what you meant by that.
Oh, thank you. Essentially, the point is it should be made simple if it's not understood otherwise. The point is we have reached a point in which if the United States does not enact glass-steagall, it will be almost impossible to take the same kind of legislation successfully into the present situation in Europe. Remember, to speak frankly, the euro system is a bad bank. And this is the time for the death of bad banks. Because it's so polluted with financial filth that you could not maintain Europe by trying to maintain the euro system. And the Greek case, just recently, shows you exactly what the danger is. This euro system cannot survive these months. If you're going to go for the euro system, crawl into the casket now. It'll make the arrangements easier. Because unless you put this thing through bankruptcy reorganization, in a rational way, which is consistent with the idea of national sovereignty, you cannot prevent Europe from going dumped into hell. I mean, that's the consideration, which makes the whole thing understandable. It's only when you understand that you understand what I mean by unique solution. We've got to have a sense of a spreading unity, a sense of common interest, once again, especially between Europe and the United States. Without that sense of common interest and the ability to establish the trust that goes with it, we cannot save either the United States or Europe. So the thing is unique. We have still, in a few days or weeks or so forth ahead, we have the possibility of some governments becoming sensible enough in Europe to recognize that, and we hope that somehow at the same time, we persuade the United States to perform its unique service of establishing glass-steagall again in the United States as a political lever in the transatlantic system for causing Europe to take the measures which will save it in turn.
Mein Name ist Gero Greb, ich komme von der deutsch-schweizer Grenze.
I'm from the German-Swiss border, and I'm following the political situation since a couple of decades now. What I just want to comment on is, do you really believe in the short period that we're discussing, 2-3 months, couple of weeks, that we can actually convince the politicians who are who are dependent on an industry? Do you really believe that in this short period of time that we can really change something? These politicians, that we change their mind? I don't believe it. Thank you.
Problem, Europe has not been receiving any leadership initiatives from the United States that are worth anything for Europe right now. I think the fact of the failure of the United States over the recent 2 presidencies, that of George W. Bush Jr. and Barack Obama, have been a key factor in causing the demoralization of Europe, which has allowed certain things in Europe to occur. If the United States were to change its tune by throwing Obama out of office at the same time as establishing a credit system, I think you would find an immediate response among people in Europe who are in a state of despair because they don't know of anything they could think themselves doing which would directly solve this problem. Therefore, if the United States acts in a sense as a partner of Europe, with a spirit of partnership on behalf of the European nations and people less maybe a few politicians who should be appropriately replaced, that we can solve the problem. Any real gesture, and of course my main pressure is against this crazy president who demands mental care rather than dental care. And if this problem were overcome, and the sense of partisanship, which, among even some of my friends in the Democratic Party, they're absolutely stupid, saying, well, we can't hurt the party, even if it's necessary to take that action to save the nation. If push comes to shove, the leadership of the Democratic Party, like, Kerry's not a bad person, but he behaved like a filthy pig, saying that a war is not a war, when the president himself had said in the last term on this thing that it was a war. Now the president's changed his mind and said it's not a war. It's a goodwill trip or something. Huh? It's an educational institution or whatever. Where we have a clear War Powers Act, you have the senator, lied and said it wasn't a war because he did not want the party to be broken up over an issue. It's called, in the United States, we call it go along to get along, or go down to be down. And that's the kind of problem it is. And that's the problem we face. The people in the United States hate everything that the Republican Party stands for. They hate everything that the Democratic Party stands for right now. And yet my friend, the former president, refuses to risk sacrificing the Democratic Party interest even for the sake of the national interest. And we have some Republicans out there who are really wild specimens too. But if you take the people as a whole, you take US politicians as a whole, go at them one at a time, in both parties, talk to them one at a time, you will find there's an agreement on the idea of a common interest in a national principle, and that party must be subordinated in every respect to national principle. If parties are any damn good, they're going to help develop the national interest. They're going to be a debating partner in defining a common interest for the nation. Because we don't unite the nation, we don't have government, not competent government. You can have a tyranny, but not a competent government. We require, throughout the world, competent government. Governments which depend upon the consent of the people, the consent of the leading factions of the people in terms of number as well. If they don't agree, we have to bring them to the understanding of the necessary agreement. But the whole thing has to be based on that kind of concept.
Hello, I have a question for Helga. It's about, I'd like to know what you would say to the Indignados movement that is growing up in Europe and in the world, in fact. And that essentially it's youth who are trying to go beyond the parties and try to fight for common interest of people. So what would be your message to them?
Well, I think they have all the right in the universe to demand a future. And given the fact that many of these people are indeed young people who are confronted with unemployment, and some of them are very educated, have finished their university education, and they have absolutely zero chances to find a job. People are sitting in Portugal, desperate. People are leaving in Greece. So, we have seen in the new countries, in the new states of Germany, what happens if the young people are leaving. You have in Germany villages of, 60 years average age. They have closed down schools. I mean, you have a dying society when this happens. And I think what the young people have to understand is that they have to bring their cause even more powerful to the older generation by challenging them, because you see, you have for the first time in history a situation where if you ask people, both old and young, do you think your children will have a better life than you? And it used to be a test of morality that parents and grandparents would say automatically, yes, I work so that my children have a better life, my grandchildren have an even better life. And this has broken for the first time, where everybody is saying, no, life will go down. And the point is the morality or the right to fight for a future is really on the side of the indignation movement. And therefore they have to make sure that they don't get, in a quagmire of, state provocation, of, police action, as I was warning, is happening in Greece. And the best thing we can do is, make such videos known, because this is EU policy. We have been told by sources in Greece that there is no way how Papandreou would have dared to commit such brutal police action without backing from the European Union Commission. And that has to be made known, because we do not want to have police states in Europe enforcing such tactics. And therefore, I think the most important thing is that, look at what happened with the peaceful revolution in Europe in Germany in 1989. This was a peaceful revolution. It was not just a change. They have, semantically now call it a change, a Wende, but it was a true revolution where peacefully the demonstrators were able to contribute to the end of this regime. But then the big problem was that they did not have the experience and the knowledge to come up with an economic development plan, and they were confronted with this gigantic geopolitical takeover, which was designed to smash the economic potential of Russia and of Germany in particular, these two countries. So they were bought up. We have been in the middle of this. People like Graf Lambsdorff came with a big wallet and said, no, you have chosen your FDP leadership. No. This one will become the chairman. And that was how the whole thing was aborted. They did not have an economic program. They didn't understand that the only way would have been to continue with an economic development program. And the same thing happened in Egypt, where when the uprising occurred, we, both in the United States and in Germany, we immediately produced videos with animated economic development programs saying this must be put on the agenda. You need an economic development plan right away, or else this is in danger of collapsing, like it happened in Germany in '89. And I think the indignados, I'm very pleased to know that they have been talking about the glass-steagall already, both in Spain and also in France, but they have to fill this out. They have to inspire their companions and everybody in Spain. Look at Spain. Spain is in a terrible condition. Spain has no industry. The famous boom which existed after the euro was introduced was a complete bubble. There are now around Madrid more than 1 million empty houses from the tourist bubble which collapsed, and there is no industry. There is not one strong industrial development in all of Spain. The same goes for Portugal. The same goes for Greece. So I think what the Indignado movement must urgently do, they must study how they can create productive jobs, not tourism. Those people in the political scene who are talking about Marshall Plan for Greece right now, if you look at it, they want to have desert tech, they want to have tourism, high price tourism, fancy, expensive tourism, so that only the people who have profited from this corrupt system can afford it. But tourism, as my husband has pointed out a long time ago, tourism does not do anything to develop the labor power of your country. I mean, the only people who profit from tourism normally are the tourist agencies and the speculators who are operating with these things, while the population have service jobs, they have cleaning jobs, they have stupid entertainment jobs. But if a country understands that the only source of wealth is the creative potential of the population, you don't want an inflated service sector. You want to go into science, into basic industries. You want to go into infrastructure, anything which increases the creative power of the population, because that you have to protect. That is your most important source of wealth. So, given the fact that we have reached now a point in the world, where you cannot have a partial solution. If you think you can solve the problem of one country or even one continent, I don't think it is like that. In previous times, when you had fundamental crises, like empires went under, like the Roman Empire went under, or other empires went under, you had flourishing renaissances in other parts of the world. When the Roman Empire went under, you had the Gupta period in India, and because it took many, many years to travel, people didn't even know about it. But this time, we are sitting in one boat as human civilization. If we do not save Africa, if we don't solve this problem, if we don't get glass-steagall, what do you think will happen? What happens in Greece is just the pre-taste. You will have streams of refugees. What do you think will happen if the inflation goes up in food prices? You will have not hundreds of people who are trying to run away from hunger and starvation and disease in Africa, like now, like 1 million Tunisians is unemployed because the country collapsed in terms of tourism. There is no more tourism in Spain. There's very little tourism in Portugal. So what do you think will happen if we don't stop that? You will have millions of people migrating from one place to another. You will have armed bands. There will be the only ones who will maraud around for a little while. If you want to stop that, then put on the agenda a true Marshall Plan, which would be a Mediterranean development plan, which would be the Trans-Aqua program for Africa. We have designed other development programs for Northern Africa. Engage Spain, Portugal, and Greece in building these things. Get a training program for the youth. Fight for development. Fight for the future. I mean, that is what people have to do to have this fight successful. Use this absolute moment of crisis, which is happening already, and it will get worse. Use that to put development on the agenda, and let's do a little bit of Christian politics by throwing the usurers out of the temples. Put real development in.
If I may, I think this is also a good illustration that we absolutely need governments to define objectives for societies, because for the last decades, it really is the economic condition and the financial markets who have defined, have dictated the objectives, and most governments have gone from, or are going, alternatively from objectives that are very simplistic, like growth at any cost, to reduce deficits at any costs, and they balance from one to the other. And that is what has produced also this financial bubble. So governments have to go back to defining themselves objectives that will be much more constructive than those simplistically defined by or dictated by financial markets.
Yeah, I can only support that, because in a crisis like that, the state and the government are the only institutions which can act for the common good. And what you have right now is the replacement of governments through so-called governance, which is not government. You know, there's a big distinction that governance means private interest groups, NGOs, financial lobbies, ad hoc working shops. You know, they have all these many forms of private groups, you know, but they are not accountable and they are not, you know, serving the common good. So I just wanted to add that to what you said.
Hello. Yes, hello. My name is Thomas Trauch. I'm an engineer from Jena. And I have a question on the strengthening of the public sector, which Mr. de Keuleneer was speaking about previously. Nowadays, many parts of the public sector are being privatized with the argument of a lack of competition. So my question is, how would you see that? Is competition something that would, for instance, under a glass-steagall system, be a topic for companies or the private sector that would be legitimate under a glass-steagall system, and not for companies or institutions which would service higher or essential service to the community? Thank you.
Well, I think very much that there is room for public sector companies in many sectors, not all sectors necessarily, but in many sectors, and the financial sector certainly is one sector where public banks have been very useful in the past and are very useful in many countries. But we should be very careful that simply being part of the public sector is not enough. And unfortunately, in many cases over the last decades, managers of public sector companies have taken advantage of being in the public sector, that there was much less constraint, there was no market constraint on them. They've taken advantage that, certainly not all of them, but some of them have taken advantage of that to manage companies or manage banks for their own profit or those of their political friends. And in fact, many publicly owned companies have been mismanaged, and that has led to the legitimation of privatization. So I think what we need is a strong public sector service, but we also need a strong investment in improving the way in which public sector companies are managed and are controlled, in order to make sure that they are managed and that they are run in the interest of citizens, not in the interest of a few people who simply manage to succeed in taking control of them without being accountable because they have been politically nominated. That happens far too often. People who have been politically nominated may be just as good as those that have been appointed by other ways. The big problems with people who have been politically appointed is that they are very difficult to sanction because their political patrons will protect them. So we need to have a strong reflection on how to better manage the public sector. And I think in the healthcare, certainly in healthcare and in finance, and in transportation and in many other sectors, we need very strong public sector companies, but we need them to be well managed. That's my conviction.
My name is Hans Bieri, and I'm listening the first time to these words here. I'm an engineer, not too young. I've been living in and working in several countries, and I think I heard very well the question of this young man: what do you recommend to us young people. When I compare what our society in Europe and societies that have come up during the last 10 years, then I see a very great difference in the motivation of the young people. Those young people in those countries, they have no such regulations from the society as we have. They are allowed to try to build something and to use it in the society. And we here, I'm older, but in interior, I'm very creative, and we are forbidden to be creative. And I think our society has to change this point. This is probably also one of the reasons why Mr. LaRouche is thinking that the United States may help Europe. I have very good colleagues in the United States. I get from time to time pictures of new things young people develop, and it's perfect what this society there allows. So Europe, try to reduce regulations.
And that we in the United States do have an advantage because despite our waning sovereignty, we still have vestiges of habits before. But the gentleman just asked the question. He's not probably my age, but he's in the same category in terms of functioning. And I can tell you that we who came out of World War II before the Truman administration had a completely different view of life than I find in the baby boomer generation, for example, which is now in their 60s, and the generation after that. We have presently, which I'm involved with organizing, a youth movement, which is people largely in the late 20s and early 30s. They still have propensity for creativity and capabilities, but the inclination, even among these youth, the young people, who are not juniors, they're not children anymore, they're grown people with real intellects. Many of them have exceptional scientific talents. But their problem is, and it's a problem which pervades Europe as well as the United States, there has been, in the entire post-war period, especially since the 1950 Congress for Cultural Freedom, there has been a systemic effort to destroy scientific and related culture in Europe. And we see the toll of it. We see it in the United States in the so-called baby boomer generation. The baby boomer generation in the United States is essentially non-functional in terms of a crisis. The whole generation is generally incapable of dealing with a crisis, as we in my generation could have. We have a younger generation coming up now, of which a minority, as we have in the so-called youth organization we have, in which creativity is maintained. But even there are frictional problems that we have to deal with daily in order to help people recognize the problem that's standing in their way. When they have the creativity in them to do the job, they're reluctant to do it because of social pressures, or what sometimes just attributed social pressures, not actually live ones. You know, it's what you think the neighbor's whispering about you behind your back, that sort of pressure. And so that's the problem. What we need is, and the United States should be able to do this, if we got rid of these two recent presidents, we could still do it. It's this, George W. Bush Jr. and Obama, which are really demoralizing the American people in a way similar to the demoralization of the European populations under recent trends. With the agreement on founding the Euro system was a deliberate act of moral destruction of the capability and the sovereignty of the nations of Europe. And so this is the kind of problem. People have the brain power in many cases, have developed it to be creative, but they're blocked by social pressures which tell them, don't do that, don't do that. And that's the problem. And one of the things, when you're in a position of leadership, is you have to recognize that is the problem. You have people who are potentially creative, but they're not likely to apply it because they're intimidated by social settings, social habits acquired, conditioned over the period since Truman became president. There was a systematic cultural effort in the United States, as in continental Europe, which coincided with about 1950, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which banned classical artistic composition. And the creative powers of scientific reason come not from science as such, not from mathematics. They come from classical artistic composition. It's the classical artistic mind and the inventiveness, the risk and the responsibility of making a contribution to classical artistic composition, which conditions the mind for to become a great scientist. For example, take Max Planck. Max Planck is also an accomplished musician. Take the case of Albert Einstein, an accomplished musician. And we find that it's people like this, the mathematicians tend to go dead on you. But the people with a musical background who are scientists tend to be the most creative ones. And that's the way we look at it, the way I look at it that way. And for me, it's a practical question of dealing with an organization we have inside the United States. And I have to think about these terms. Yes, we're thinking about science, we're doing it probably as much as anyone. But what makes us able to do that is to a degree, and we developed our youth organization on that basis, on a classical artistic composition basis. Because it's when the mind learns the discipline of creative scientific work, that mind can understand science quickly. The one who is the mathematician with no decent classical cultural background goes dead when faced with the challenge of actual productivity.
Okay, we take one last question and then we make a break.
Hello, I'm Leona. I'm also from the LaRouche movement, from the youth movement here in Germany. And my question is because Mr. LaRouche, you declared liberalism as the enemy, and you just said now with the problem of the degeneracy of the whole societies since the baby boomer generation. And yeah, the question is, how can we get rid of this whole liberalism for whole societies, not only here in Europe, but yeah, all over the place, when we are just like a quantitatively smaller force? How can we do this?
You know, the mind of the human individual is not a small force. The mind of the human individual is the largest force in the universe we know of, apart from the Creator himself. So when you are truly creative, the question is, you cannot be creative without passion. If you don't have a passion to create, you're not stimulated to create. And even whipping you will not do no good in that direction. So therefore, it's the inspiration of understanding how elements of society go together. And the way you learn that is, we've got a new video just posted yesterday, which is Sky Shields has been working on for some time, on the demonstration of the principle of creativity through the example of Bach. And there are definite principles which any good scientist can recognize as to how it is that Bach's composition is one of the greatest acts of scientific genius done in modern history. The greatest achievement in all artistic composition, in the development of the mind, the development of the moral character of the mind. Well, you've got to learn to do it properly, of course. Otherwise, it doesn't do much good. But once you've gotten to the point that you can do it properly and understand what it is you're trying to master, and you're devoted to mastering it, this organizes your mind in a way which is very suitable for any kind of physical scientific creativity. And the cases of Max Planck and of Albert Einstein are simply illustrations of it. There are many others.
If I may add something to that, I think it's also worth remembering that markets are good for a number of things, but giving a central role to markets for everything like we do in our societies is a great danger for creativity, because markets work by mimetism, by imitation, and they tend to standardization. And therefore, in as much as some kind of competition is good for creativity, of course, imitation and standardization are not, and therefore the role of markets, even though they can be useful in some things, the role of markets has to be limited if we want to have enough useful creation, useful creativity. There is a lot of totally useless and dangerous creativity, amongst other, in the finance world. Financial innovation is worth a full day session in itself, but is rarely useful.
Science is good when it's beautiful, and you learn the idea of beauty properly from principle. The best ways to learn it is to become a qualified musician in performing things like Bach and Mozart. That's the best shot you've got for training your mind properly.